afternoon and welcome to the Live Wire. I'm Meg Whalen. I'm the Director of Communications for the College of Arts and Architecture. And today we have with us two members of our Department of Theater, our Robinson Distinguished Professor of Shakespeare, Dr. Andrew Hartley, and Casey King, who is a theater major. And they are going to talk to us today about The Merry Wives, which is the current production in the Department of Theater, and it opens tonight. Yeah. And so we hope people will come. There are 2 weekends of runs. It opens tonight and runs through November 2nd, so there are many performances, many opportunities to see it, and it's over in Robinson Hall in our Black Box Theater. So today I just wanted to get a sense a little bit about the play itself, in case people don't know it. It's not quite as famous as Romeo and Juliet, which we did a couple of years ago. And then a little bit about what people will expect in this production. It is an updated staging of it, and the fact that it's in the Black Box Theater makes it a very different experience for the audience from what they would experience in something like our Belk Theater. So we'll talk a little bit about those things and let people know where to get tickets and where to see it if they don't come. We're going to do a live broadcast of it as well. So we'll talk about all these things. First, maybe Dr. Hartley, if you could just give us a little bit of context for this play within Shakespeare's overall work. How many, I know this is a loaded question, so how many works are there in Shakespeare's? I'll start with a hard question. How many plays did Shakespeare write?
Well, we don't know. It depends how you count. Most assume 37, 38, but it depends what you include, and it depends whether you consider exclusively Shakespearean plays or Shakespeare collaborations. But even that is shaky because some plays that we used to think were by Shakespeare alone now look like collaborations, including Macbeth and Measure for Measure. And then other plays have recently been added to the canon, like Edward I. And so, yeah, it's tricky. But we're talking about roughly 40.
Right, and I think
2 a year for about 20 years.
Right. We had played around, I think, as a department with 36.
Yeah.
Because we were in a project, or are in a project of doing 36 in 6 years.
Yeah.
So this production fits within that.
Yes.
We're not doing productions of all of those plays, but we are doing some kind of treatment of or exploration into them over the period leading up to the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death in 2016.
Yep.
So The Merry Wives, which the full name is The Merry Wives of Windsor, where does that fall in that 36 to 40 roughly? Is it early, middle, or late?
It's late early, if that makes sense.
Okay.
It's roughly mid to late 1590s. So it's in that portion of Shakespeare's career when he's writing primarily history plays and the early and middle comedies. And Merry Wives is a kind of hybrid because the core character, Falstaff, has appeared in previous plays. He's in the Henry IV plays, Henry IV Part 1, Henry IV Part 2, and he dies off stage in Henry V. Most people think the play is written somewhere between Henry IV Part 2 and Henry V. So it's around 1597 or thereabouts. But generically, it's quite different from the history plays. It's much more of a farce. Falstaff is the locus of all the comic energy in the history plays. But this is a different kind of comedy. It's much more like a satirical comedy. It feels more like a play that might have been written by Middleton or Johnson a few years later, perhaps. So it centers on Falstaff arriving in Windsor with his entourage and causing trouble and looking to make money, which is what Falstaff frequently does. And the way that he does that is by pursuing the wives who he thinks are in love with him, or he can make them in love with him, and trying to make money that way.
Well, let's look a little bit at those wives. And Casey, you are.
I am one of the wives.
One of the wives, yes. And I even have a picture of you looking great unlike yourself.
Yes.
This is from dress rehearsal. from the other evening. Great hair and glasses.
Oh yeah,
really
like my mom.
Yeah.
Oh, she's going to love that.
She's gonna love. Besides the face.
So tell me about this character that you play. Who is she?
This is Mistress Page. She's one of the wives, and she, I think, is the most controlling person in the play. She is a need to be in control constantly, and I like to think she's the brains behind the wives' operations between her and Mistress Ford. So she and Mistress Ford basically do all these plots to try and trick Falstaff because he's coming at them and trying to make them not the honest women that they are.
There you are with your...
Yes, there's Mistress Ford.
So, and who is the student playing Mistress Ford?
That is Jennifer Huddleston. She's also a theater major, and she's playing Mistress Ford. She does a great job. We really worked with these two characters on making them complete opposites. So you can kind of tell in this photo, I'm a much more grounded, lower to the floor woman. She is much more upright. And I also have a much higher voice than her in the show. And that's something we worked with Carlos Alexis Cruz, one of the theater teachers, worked with him doing on the physicality of the characters.
Right, and there's a pronounced difference in your costumes.
Yes. I'm much more, the goal here was I was much more ratchet soccer mom, and she was much more trophy wife. Yeah. So hopefully that comes across.
I think it definitely does.
Perfect.
While we're looking at these photographs from the dress rehearsal, it's obvious right away that this is not an Elizabethan staging, and the very concept of soccer mom and trophy wife are much more modern concepts. Talk a little bit about kind of what is the context for this production, the setting for this, and what you were thinking as you put it together.
What we were thinking. Yeah. What were we thinking? Well, Merry Wives is an oddity in that in some ways it's the least Shakespearean of the comedies, as I was saying before. And it's one of the only ones which is really anchored in England that isn't a history. So partly as a result, a lot of modern productions really go out of their way to make this set in Elizabethan Windsor. And so you see a lot of sets with timber-beamed houses and stuff like that. I don't find that particularly interesting, personally. I mean, once you've seen one of those shows, you've seen them all. That's not fair, but I'll say it anyway. We wanted to try, we wanted to do what we always do when we do Shakespeare, which is to say, why this play, why now? What is it that we're trying to communicate? Who are we trying to communicate with? And there's a lot about these plays which is already unfamiliar and in some ways alienating. And we wanted to break some of that down and try to access the play as a study in character types that are still familiar in some ways. And I think this play does lend itself to that better than a lot of the comedies, because in some ways it's less psychologically dense, it's less realist. And so the representation of, say, the fanatically jealous husband still works, you know. So this setting is much more, as you say, it's much more contemporary, but it's also larger than life. It's not supposed to be, we actually flirted with the idea of calling the production The Merry Wives of Waxhaw, but you'll be delighted to know we decided not to do that. So I don't think it is anchored in a very particular location. There was a lot of talk early on of going for a sort of southern country club kind of feel, and I think you see that in the set to a certain extent. But ultimately the production itself is more, I wouldn't say abstract, but it doesn't have a sense of being rooted in a very particular place. Right. And everything about it leans a little bit towards the cartoon in terms of the physicality of the actors and the kind of clothes that they're wearing, and everything is just a little bit larger than life.
Yeah, the colors are very bright
Yeah.
and almost garish. I should mention that when it comes to faculty participation in the creation of this production. It is a group effort. The play is directed by Kelly Ryan, who was not able to be with us. She's in class this afternoon. And you mentioned Carlos Alexis Cruz, who is our voice and movement professor, who's been working with the cast as well. And Dr. Hartley, you have served in a dramaturgical capacity, helping sort of shape, I guess, the interpretation and presentation of it. Here we have Falstaff.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
In all his glory. And tell us who this student is.
That's Delaney Edinger, I believe that's his last name, and he's a hoot. The first time, I've never worked with him before, and so when he went in the first time we were actually moving around, he is the most bold actor I think I've met in the department. He just goes for it. He's great.
That's why he's
great.
Falstaff.
That's
right?
why.
It's a very
It makes
Falstaffian characteristic. That sort of no holds barred. Just go for it. A lot of bluster, a lot of self-confidence, not always justified. In Falstaff, not in Delaney. Right? But certain swagger to the character.
I know in the Henry plays, Falstaff sort of, I mean, there are times when he's despicable, and there are times when you really feel this pity and compassion. How is that? Is there that kind of complexity to his character here, or is it more cartoonish and one-dimensional?
I would say it's more cartoonish and one-dimensional, and it's not just Falstaff. I think it's everybody, including the other characters who are holdovers from the Henry plays. Pistol and Nym and Bardolph are all playing sort of cartoon versions of what they were before. So the play doesn't have the same pathos, I think. I mean, I think the way that the story resolves allows you to scrutinize the dynamic within this community and say, where does somebody like Falstaff fit in? Because it's very much a play about the people who are on the inside of the community and the people who are on the outside. And it's not just Falstaff who's on the outside. There are other characters who are sort of lampooned because of their dialects and things like that. There's what was written as a Welsh character who's being played as a Spaniard in ours, and there's a French character. And so there's a sense that Windsor is kind of under attack from something outside that is not us, that doesn't share a particular kind of middle class sort of value, which I think is a very Elizabethan idea.
Right.
But in the course of the play, I think, and we were talking about this in class the other day, in the course of the play, I think we start to see that Windsor is not a perfect community by any means, and that there are fissures and fault lines in the dynamic of the characters who live there, which are somehow exposed by this pressure from the outside, so that when we get to the end of the play, we have to kind of rethink the nature of that community.
Yeah. Let's look at a couple of more pictures.
As a Spaniard.
So tell us about who these folks are.
The one on, I don't know.
In the hat?
Yes, thank you. That is Slender, and he's played by Kevin. And he's just a character who's really not all there, at least in our production. He's very just in his own mind, not really present with everyone else when it comes to...
It's very immature, very boyish.
Right. And then this is in the Shakespeare, like actual written down, it's the Welsh character, but ours is Padre Hugo Nunez. And he's played by Carlos. And a great description for him. He's always, like he's trying to put his hand in everything, and
and he, like some of the other characters, are defined very much by the way that they speak and the way everybody responds around them to the way that they sort of mangle the English language.
And then it looks like we have some physicality here in the production.
Yes. The guy with the sword, that is his play. The actor's name is Nate, and he is Dr. Caius. He's the French doctor who, once again, is kind of on the outside due to the way he speaks. And him and Padre, the guy before, he gets in, they get a little bit of a tiff, which we'll see how it resolves. So he's very hot-headed. He's a very hot-headed man.
Very big, very loud. A lot of big, loud people in this play.
Yeah, I think
Or at least in this
everyone is.
production.
Yeah.
So that is an interesting point, because the setting for this production, for the actual performance, is in our Black Box Theater, which is not a big space.
I'm excited.
It's a small space, and I'm not sure how many seats it'll be set up for this show. I know it can hold around 100, sometimes it's as few as 70, so we have it about 90 this time. That's the nice thing about a Black Box space, is that it can be reconfigured.
Yes.
So let's just talk a little bit about that. First, from the performer's perspective, what is it like to play in that space and to play these larger-than-life characters in such a small space?
It's funny, my mom actually just talked to me yesterday when she saw the Belk Theater for the first time at the Robinson Hall Gala, and she was so angry when she found out we were in the Black Box. She's like, your show should be on the main stage because there's so many more seats. And I was like, Mom, I don't want to perform on the main stage in the Belk Theater, because there's something about getting to see audience members' faces and getting to look at each and every one of them in the eye and see the reaction that just fuels your performance even more. So I'm really glad we're doing this large show or larger-than-life show in the Black Box, just to get to see the reactions, because it fuels us as performers, and it just makes us want to give even more because we want them to have a reaction.
Have you been to one of a different performance in the Black Box as a spectator, as an audience?
I did. I went to 448 Psychosis.
Which was a very distinctive audience experience.
Yes, that was really up close and personal, and I love being in those shows as well, because I love feeling like I'm in the show with the actors and performers. So there was something that someone once, a director told me, and we had a really small audience for our show that we were doing, and people were complaining. They're like, oh, 30 people, that's not a lot. And he said that his ideal audience was an audience of one, because that's how you should perform, is for one person. You want everyone to feel like they're the one person you're performing for. And that stuck with me, so I love that we're in this space. I love the space, so.
Yeah. I wanted to have you, Casey, talk a little bit from the student perspective, and then Dr. Hartley from the professor perspective, about the learning process. I mean, this is a public performance, and we present it as any theater company would, but at the same time, it is an educational experience for the cast, for the students. And so, and we do Shakespeare regularly here. Practically every year, we'll do some form of a production of Shakespeare. And I know, Casey, that you were in last spring's production, which was not a full production, but it was a kind of a unique experience that many people probably saw, and it also was broadcast live, I think. So just talk to me a little bit about what you're learning, both from the Shrew Project, or the Taming of the Shrew, which was last year's production, and this year with the Merry Wives. What are the things that you find challenging, gratifying? How are you better now than you were a year ago?
I would say the language is the main thing you have to overcome when you dive into the show, which Andrew actually does a great job. He did it with the Shrew Project and with this, about making sure you understand what you're saying before you say it. You should never say a line that you have no idea what the meaning is. And then to use that line. And I did Shrew Project last spring, and then I went over to London and did a show there, and we did a Shakespeare show, Pericles. And we worked with a couple performers over there on how to perform Shakespeare. And there are all these tricks that they taught us, and so coming back to get to do Merry Wives and try these tricks on a new show was really exciting. And I feel much more accomplished as a performer after doing Shakespeare, because it is very, very difficult, I think, for myself especially, to put on a show. And it's not only about, I know that I'm understanding what I'm saying now when I go into the show, but performing for the audience and making sure they're catching on with what I'm saying, because I know, being an audience member for a Shakespeare show, it's sometimes hard to follow the language. And so I definitely feel much more accomplished when I can make someone understand what I'm saying to them in the show. If that makes sense.
That makes perfect sense. I think that that's always the key difference between a seasoned and well-prepared actor performing Shakespeare and someone who isn't. It is the experience as an audience member of that language, and when it's, you know, like actors from the London stage that we have had come, that rotating 5-member company comes.
Who we have coming in the spring.
We have coming in the spring, in March again, and they were here last fall a year ago in Othello, and when you hear them perform, it's just as if you and I are talking. There's no effort to understanding the language, which I think is such a miraculous thing, because if it's not performed well, it is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So Dr. Hartley, as you work with students to try to achieve that level of presentation and fluidity and understanding, comprehension, so that their own articulation and interpretation is clear, what are some of the things that you do to help the students understand this?
I yell at them a lot. I think
Brings loads of books.
I bring loads of books. Partly, I think sometimes it's helpful to say, you know, that there's a range of choices. You know, that a word can mean a lot of different things, and the feel of it can fluctuate or vary in the mouth of the performer. But I think what you were saying before about how Shakespeare can be very off-putting and difficult is the biggest hurdle. That sometimes when actors read Shakespeare, they kind of give up on treating it as if it's actual speech, and they want to present it as verse. Mm-hmm. And they think that means they don't really need to understand it. And I can't tell you the number of times in rehearsal when you say, do you understand what you're saying? And they say, well, I get the gist.
Right.
And the gist isn't good enough. Thing. You know, the gist, that might be a starting point. That's the Wikipedia entry on the speech. But then you have to actually do the work. And you have to be able to, every word needs to feel like your own. It's about ownership, I think. It's about embodying the language so that it feels that you can make it a part of who you are and say it in a convincing way because you're inside the head of the character, assuming we're doing a kind of realist performance. And if we can't get to that point, then I think we have to then say, maybe we need to cut this line, or maybe we need to modify a word, because in the end, we're not in the business of archaeology, we're in the business of theatre. And if the theatre isn't communicating in the present right now without footnotes, then it's not working. So my attitude always is, you know, to use whatever research we can bring to bear on the text to open up as many rich and interesting possibilities, and then use that to make sure that the actor can fully grasp what it is that they're saying and get it across to the audience. Because if the actor doesn't understand it, the audience isn't going to understand it.
Right.
And I think in rehearsal, we always know when we've missed something. I know the first read through, because Andrew will start laughing and no one else is, and we're like, we've missed something. Right. So that's a dead giveaway.
You know, I just read yesterday, I guess, an article in Science Daily, and there's a group that has been doing real measured research on the effect of arts engagement on youth. And they are doing visual arts and performing arts and with control groups, and really trying to get some data that you can, that holds up, I guess, to scrutiny. And so this most recent study that they've done is on the impact of seeing live theater and how that influences the young people. I think they're middle school, high school age. And so they studied the difference between seeing a live play, reading that play, and seeing a film version of it. And Hamlet was one of the plays. There were two. One was not Shakespeare. I don't recall the other one. But what was interesting was the huge difference between seeing a play performed live and reading it
Yeah.
and seeing a film of it. And if they saw a film of it or they read it, the comprehension of the plot and the characters was not nearly as complete and sophisticated as in the live performance. And also the development of empathy and the ability to kind of read the emotional
Yeah.
state of human beings in general
Yeah.
was so much greater when they had seen a live performance.
Well, I used the word ownership before when I was talking about the actor's relationship to the text, but I think that word applies to the audience as well. And it's one of the reasons, to come back to your previous point about the black box theatre, one of the reasons that I like being in that space, as opposed to being on the Belk stage, wonderful though that space is that the production stops being pictorial, it stops being at a distance, and it becomes something that includes the audience, that the audience surrounds it, because we're using a thrust configuration, which in many ways is much closer to the kind of dynamic of the original playhouses that Shakespeare worked in. And it's that sense of a direct engagement with the audience that gives them a share in what this production is, and it invites them to take a certain ownership of the show, as opposed to keeping them at a distance in that proscenium, the invisible fourth wall kind of approach, which is a perfectly valid style of theatre. But for Shakespeare, I prefer something which is more immersive.
Well, let me just make sure people know where and how to get tickets so that they can come and be immersed. So the box office at Robinson Hall is open, I think, 11 to 3, and people can go there and get tickets. We also have the website arts.uncc.edu, and tickets are available there. So good luck tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
it's
so much.
exciting. The opening night. Thank you for
keep reading.
taking some time to tell us about it and get some rest before the evening. Thank you for being with us too, and
you.
thank you for joining us on the live wire, and tune in next week.